Hi there. Welcome back to Haunting Vales. Tonight's case begins not with a scream, nor with a cry for help, but with silence. A bell that should have rung never did. A signal never sounded, a warning never heard. Why was the bell silent? Was it broken or silenced on purpose? And what dark truth was hidden in its silence? Join us as Hercule Poirot follows the trail of a puzzle where every sound matters, and the silence speaks louder than words. If you enjoy these mysteries, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Haunting Vales, and ring the bell so you never miss another case. Chapter 1. The Silent Bell Tolls No More. The small village of Saint-Avellin had always been wrapped in an air of quiet dignity. Nestled among misty hills and ancient woodlands, it was the sort of place where life moved slowly, where neighbors knew each other by name, and where gossip never truly died. It merely lingered, like smoke trapped beneath the rafters of an old inn. At the heart of Saint-Avellin stood the ancient church of Saint-Étienne. Its spire rose high into the sky, catching the last embers of the sun each evening. For centuries, the church bell had marked the hours of prayer, the times of gathering, and the passing of souls. Its toll was the pulse of the village. And then, one morning, it was gone. Not broken, not removed, not stolen, simply silent. The bell rope hung stiff, refusing to move even when tugged. The great bronze heart that once rang for weddings and funerals alike now offered only stillness, an absence that was far louder than sound. The villagers murmured. Old women crossed themselves in fear. Men shook their heads and muttered about bad omens. The priest, Father Dominic, could only frown in bewilderment as he inspected the tower himself. There was no crack in the bell, no damage to the mechanism, no reason at all for silence. And then the death occurred. Lady Margaret Arundel, wealthy widow of the grand estate nearby, was found lifeless in her drawing room, her eyes wide open, her hands clutching a scrap of parchment. On that parchment, in a hand none recognized, were the words, "When the bell is silent, beware the truth." It was then that Hercule Poirot arrived. The famous Belgian detective had not come by accident. He had been invited discreetly by Inspector Jules Morel, a local man who had once trained at Scotland Yard. The inspector, though competent, had a humility rare in policemen. He knew when a matter might require the mind of one whose fame had traveled across Europe. Poirot's mustaches, magnificently waxed and curled, trembled ever so slightly as he stepped from the motor car. His eyes, those green, feline eyes that saw what others missed, moved at once to the church spire. "Mon ami," he murmured to his companion. "Captain Arthur Hastings, do you observe? The tower. It looks down upon us as though it hides a secret. A bell that does not toll. It is like a mouth that refuses to speak." Hastings, loyal as always, frowned. "Dash it all, Poirot, it's only a bell. Things go wrong with mechanisms all the time." Poirot smiled, but there was no humor in his eyes. "Ah, Hastings, but things, they do not go wrong at the precise moment when they will cause the greatest unease, unless there is a guiding hand." That evening, Poirot and Hastings were invited to dine at the Arundel estate. The house was a monument of wealth, its rooms lined with oil paintings of ancestors long forgotten, its windows looking out upon dark, sprawling gardens. Gathered, there were the principal players of what Poirot, in his heart, already knew would be a mystery worth his talents. Edward Arundel, Lady Margaret's son, a man of 35, proud and cold, his eyes glittering with suppressed rage. Clara Arundel, his younger sister, frail and pale, who clutched a small silver cross as though it alone could protect her. Dr. James Felton, the family physician, who had been the first to examine the body. His hands were steady, but his voice quavered when questioned. Beatrice Langton, Lady Margaret's companion and secretary, whose composure was so perfect it was suspicious in itself. As the servants cleared the table, Poirot leaned back, fingers steepled. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, "forgive me. But I must ask, you all heard the bell. Or rather, you did not hear it. Tell me, when did it first fall silent?" There was a murmur among them. It was Edward who answered, his tone clipped. "The morning of my mother's death. She rose at dawn, as she often did, and remarked upon herself. I was with her. She said it was unsettling. And that, monsieur, was the last time you saw her alive?" "Yes." Clara sobbed quietly into her handkerchief. Poirot's eyes softened for a moment before they returned to their keen sharpness. "The bell," Poirot said slowly, "and the death, they are entwined. Of that, I have no doubt. But the question is, how?" Later, walking through the gardens beneath a moon that hung like a pale coin in the sky, Hastings shook his head. "I can't see the connection, Poirot. A bell that won't ring, and a woman who dies with a note in her hand. It could be coincidence." Poirot stopped, his gaze fixed upon the distant church spire. "My dear Hastings, have you forgotten? In the murder of Roger Ackroyd, the telephone that did not speak at the proper hour. Ah, it was most important, was it not? In Murder on the Orient Express, it was the silence of the night that concealed the footsteps of many. And in Death on the Nile, it was the timing of the shots, so carefully arranged, that told us who was guilty. Always, mon ami, it is not only what is seen and heard, but what is not." He tapped the side of his head. "The bell is silent, Hastings. And silence, in a language of crime, speaks volumes." The following morning, Poirot climbed the narrow steps of the church tower with Inspector Morel. Dust rose in little clouds with every footfall. The air grew colder, thinner, and the silence pressed in upon them like a weight. At last they reached the bell itself, a massive bronze creation, green with age, its mouth open to the air. The rope was intact, the mechanism untouched, and yet, when Morel pulled, the bell made no sound. Poirot stepped forward, his fingers brushing delicately along the metal. His eyes narrowed. "There is no crack," he murmured. "And yet, observe here, this stain, this faint powder along the edge. Not dust from years past. Something recent, something deliberate." He looked at Morel gravely. "Inspector, I tell you this. The bell is not broken by time. It is silenced by intention. Someone wished it mute." Morel swallowed. "But why?" Poirot's mustaches twitched. "That, mon ami, is the puzzle. The puzzle of the silent bell." And as they descended, the church doors opened below, and Clara Arundel entered, her face white as death, her hands trembling. "Monsieur Poirot," she cried, "it has happened again. Another note." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Another note, mademoiselle? But of course. A killer who warns is a killer who fears. Show me." She held it out. The parchment read, "When the bell is silent, a second will fall." The silence of the church seemed to deepen, wrapping them all in a dreadful foreboding. Poirot closed his eyes for a long moment. "The game," he whispered, "has begun." Chapter 2. Echoes in the Tower. The discovery of the second note sent tremors through the Arundel household. Servants whispered in corners, their eyes darting nervously toward the looming silhouette of Saint-Étienne's church. Villagers, upon hearing the news, crossed themselves twice when they passed the gates of the estate. And in the study of that ancient house, Hercule Poirot sat with his fingertips pressed together, his gaze steady upon the scrap of parchment. The words were elegantly penned, almost artful in their composition, and yet they trembled with menace. "When the bell is silent, a second will fall." Hastings paced the length of the room like a restless soldier awaiting orders. "This is monstrous, Poirot. Whoever wrote this has a taste for theatrics. First Lady Margaret, and now a promise of another death? Dash it all, we can't sit by and wait for it to happen." Poirot did not answer immediately. He leaned back in the armchair, his eyes half closed, his mustaches twitching as though they were antennae picking up the faintest signals of truth. Finally, he spoke, his voice soft but deliberate. "Hastings, mon ami, have you ever noticed how the criminals in real life love to mimic those of fiction? The ABC murders, for instance, was the work of a mind who longed for spectacle. A killer who writes notes, who warns of what is to come. Such a one craves attention. But attention, Hastings, is dangerous. It makes the hand tremble, the mind careless." Inspector Morel, who stood nearby, cleared his throat. "Monsieur Poirot, do you suggest we can prevent the second death by studying this note?" Poirot's eyes open wide. "Mais oui, inspecteur. A note is a confession in disguise. Consider, why write it all? Why not kill in silence? To warn is to reveal something of oneself. It betrays pride, fear, perhaps even guilt." That night, Poirot requested to see each member of the household in turn. Edward Arundel was the first. He entered the study briskly, his posture military, his jaw clenched. He seemed a man always at war, with himself, with others, with life itself. "Monsieur Arundel," Poirot said gently, "tell me, were you aware of your mother's enemies?" Edward's lips tightened. "Enemies? My mother was difficult, proud, some would say domineering. She made no secret of her opinions, and not all of them were flattering to those around her. But enemies?" He shrugged coldly. "Every woman of influence has them, perhaps even in her own house." Poirot's gaze flicked toward the firelight. Edward's nostrils flared, but he gave no answer. Clara Arundel was next. She entered timidly, her cross clutched so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her eyes were red from weeping, but behind the tears there was a sharpness that Poirot did not miss. "Mademoiselle Clara," he said kindly, "forgive me, but I must ask, were you afraid of your mother?" She hesitated, then whispered yes. "Because she was severe?" "No, monsieur. Because she knew too much. She always seemed to know what one had done, even the little things. Once, when I was 16, I sneaked out to meet a boy by the river. I thought no one had seen me. But the next morning, she placed the very scarf I had worn upon my bed, without a word." Clara shivered. She saw everything. Poirot nodded slowly. "And now, it seems, someone wishes to silence not only the bell, but her voice forever." Dr. Felton followed. His hands were steady as he lit his pipe, but Poirot's keen eyes detected the faint tremor in his left thumb. "Doctor," Poirot asked, "the death of Lady Margaret, you are satisfied it was natural?" Felton exhaled a long stream of smoke. "Satisfied? No, but I found no wound, no poison I could detect. Her heart simply stopped. It is not uncommon in women of her age." Non, Poirot said, wagging his finger. "The heart does not simply stop without reason. There is always a cause. Invisible, perhaps, but there." The doctor stiffened. "Are you suggesting I missed it?" "I suggest, mon cher médecin, that perhaps the cause is one that does not leave the usual signs. A powder, a vapor, a touch upon the skin. Subtle but deadly." Felton's pipe shook as he brought it to his lips. Beatrice Langton was the last. She glided into the room like a woman stepping onto a stage. Her dark hair was perfectly coiffed, her eyes steady, her voice low and musical. "You wish to see me, Monsieur Poirot?" "Oui, mademoiselle. You were Lady Margaret's companion. You knew her better than most. Tell me, what troubled her in her final days?" Beatrice smiled faintly. "Troubled? Only the usual. Her children's quarrels, the affairs of the estate. She was strong, Monsieur Poirot, stronger than you might think. She feared nothing except the bell." Poirot leaned forward. "Ah, she feared the bell. Yes. A week before her death, she told me she had dreamt of it falling silent. She woke in terror, saying it was an omen. And then, of course, it did fall silent. The woman's gaze darkened. She believed it meant death would follow. Perhaps she was right. Poirot bowed his head. Merci, mademoiselle. You have been most helpful. But when she left, Hastings muttered, I don't trust her, Poirot. She's too calm. Poirot's lips twitched. Ah, Hastings, you would make the mistake of many. A woman who is calm is not always a woman who is guilty. But one who is too calm when the world is in chaos. That is most interesting. The next morning brought grim news. The village awoke to the tolling of a bell. Not the silent one in the tower, but the smaller handbell of Father Dominic, rung frantically in the square. His face was pale, his eyes wide with fear. There has been another death, he cried. At the church, Poirot and Hastings arrived swiftly. Inside the nave, lying sprawled across the cold stone floor, was Father Dominic himself, lifeless, his body discovered by an altar boy moments before. The boy sobbed as he told the story. He went to pray at dawn, monsieur. He said he wanted to speak to God about the silence of the bell. And then he fell. He never rose again. Clutched in the priest's hand was another scrap of parchment. Poirot knelt, delicately retrieving it with a handkerchief. When the bell is silent, the shepherd shall fall. The inspector swore under his breath. Hastings turned pale. Poirot, this is madness. Lady Margaret, and now Father Dominic. What possible connection could there be? Poirot rose slowly, his eyes glittering with cold fire. Connection, Hastings? There is always connection. One death may be chance. Two, never. And note well, the killer names them not as people, but as symbols. The matriarch, the shepherd, is a game of allegory, Hastings. And games, they have rules. To defeat the killer, we must learn them. That afternoon, Poirot demanded the church be emptied of all except himself, Hastings, and Inspector Morel. The great nave was cloaked in shadows, the silence oppressive. The bell tower loomed above them like a watchful eye. Poirot walked slowly down the aisle, his patent leather shoes clicking against the flagstones. At each pew, he paused, observing the scratches upon the wood, the wax drippings from candles, the flowers left to wilt in vases. His gaze was not random. It swept with the precision of a man solving an equation. Finally, he stopped at the altar rail. He bent low, touched the floor, and brought his fingers close to his nose. He inhaled. Do you smell it, Hastings? Hastings sniffed uncertainly. Smell? Just incense. No, mon ami. Something sharper. A trace of chemical. I cannot yet say what, but it is not incense. This church is no longer only a house of God. It is also a house of crime. Inspector Morel wiped his brow nervously. Monsieur Poirot, the villagers are in panic. They whisper of curses, of omens. They say the bell has been silenced by the hand of the devil himself. Poirot's mustaches bristled indignantly. Pa, the devil does not write notes on parchment. Inspector, that is the hand of man, and it is the hand we shall expose. That evening, as the storm rolled in over Saint-Avellin, Poirot gathered the household once more in the drawing room. Lightning cracked across the windows. Thunder growled like some ancient beast. My friends, Poirot said, his voice cutting through the storm, you are all in danger. The killer has struck twice and will strike again. Until I solve the puzzle, you must not wander alone, not by night, not by day. Trust no one but those within your sight. Edward scowled. So we are to be prisoners in our own home. Better prisoners, monsieur, Poirot replied coolly, than corpses. There was a silence, and in that silence, the thunder rolled again, like the voice of the bell that could no longer ring. Poirot's eyes swept the room, studying each face, the anger in Edward's, the fear in Clara's, the trembling in the doctor's hands, the serenity of Beatrice. And within himself, Poirot whispered, the truth is here. In this room. Hidden, yes, but not forever. The bell is silent. But Hercule Poirot, he shall make it speak. Chapter 3. Secrets Beneath the Silence. The storm did not abate that night. Rain lashed against the windows of Arundel Manor, and the old trees groaned under the weight of the wind. Within the drawing room, however, Hercule Poirot remained still as a statue, his eyes closed, his fingers tapping a rhythmic pattern upon the arm of his chair. Hastings, restless as ever, muttered under his breath while pacing. "Dash it, Poirot, the entire village is half mad with fear. They say Father Dominic was struck down by divine judgment. And the bell, well, some swear they've heard it ring in the night, though it remains silent by day." Poirot's eyes snapped open. "Ah, that Hastings is most interesting. You see, people always hear what they fear to hear. The imagination, it is the accomplice of crime. If they say they have heard the bell, then perhaps they have. But the question is not whether it rings, but how." Hastings stopped mid-stride. "You think it does ring?" Poirot leaned forward, his gaze sharp. "I think, mon ami, that nothing is as simple as it seems. A bell that does not ring by rope may yet ring by other means. And what better distraction than a sound in the night?" The next morning, Inspector Morel arrived with new information. His coat dripped with rain, his hat was askew, and his face was pale with sleeplessness. "Monsieur Poirot, a strange discovery. We searched the belfry again. Hidden behind the wooden panels, we found a small vial of powder. I've sent it to Paris for analysis." Poirot's mustaches quivered in approval. "Bon, already we approach the truth. The powder? Yes, I suspected it. Something was spread upon the bell's surface to dampen its voice. Perhaps resin, perhaps a chemical designed to absorb vibration. A clever trick. The silence of the bell, it was no accident. It was the signal." "Signal?" Hastings frowned. "We think, Hastings. Each death has been marked by the bell's silence. The killer uses it as both omen and weapon. Lady Margaret's death, when the bell fell mute. Father Dominic's, when the silence remained. The pattern, Hastings the pattern. And when one knows the pattern, one can foresee the next move." Poirot requested to examine Lady Margaret's chambers once more. The room was untouched since her death, preserved like a shrine by the servants. Heavy curtains shut out the light, and the air carried the faint scent of lavender. Poirot moved delicately, his patent shoes whispering against the carpet. He touched the dressing table, the books, the drawer handles. Finally, he paused before the writing desk. "Ah," he murmured, "here we have the correspondence of a woman who knew too much." He rifled carefully through letters and notes. Many were mundane, estate business, invitations, bills, but one stood out. It was unsigned, the handwriting bold and slanted. "Lady Arundel, you meddle where you should not. Keep from the tower, or the bell shall cease to speak." Hastings gasped. "So she was warned?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Exactement, mon ami. She was warned, and she ignored the warning. That is why she died. But what was she meddling in?" Poirot tapped the letter. "That is the heart of it. She was close to discovering something in the tower, something the killer feared. And so, silence, for the bell, and for her." In the afternoon, Poirot asked Beatrice Langton to join him in the library. She came gracefully, her dark dress rustling softly against the carpet. "Mademoiselle," Poirot began, "you told me Lady Margaret feared the bell. Yet this letter proves she was warned, not merely fearful. Did you know of this?" Beatrice's lips parted, then pressed tightly shut. "At last," she sighed. "I knew she received strange notes. She confided in me once, saying she felt the church tower hid secrets best left undisturbed. But she never showed me the letters. Perhaps she feared for me." Poirot studied her closely. "You cared for her deeply?" "Yes," she said firmly. "She was not easy to serve, but she was formidable. She needed someone who would not tremble before her, and I was that someone. But others hated her strength. And who, mademoiselle, hated her most? Beatrice hesitated, then whispered, her own son. That evening, Poirot found Edward in the smoking room, staring into a glass of brandy as though it contained all the answers of the universe. Your mother received threats, monsieur, Poirot said quietly. Did you know? Edward looked up, his eyes bloodshot. No, she would never tell me. She never told me anything. Do you know what it was like, Poirot? To be a grown man, yet treated like a child in your own home? She controlled every coin, every decision. I could not even sell a field without her permission. You resented her? Resented? I hated her. Edward's voice cracked, then hardened. But I did not kill her. I swear it. Poirot's gaze remained steady. Hatred, monsieur, is not proof, but it is motive. Later that night, Poirot stood once more before the silent church tower. Hastings beside him shivered in the damp mist. You've spoken of patterns, Poirot. What do you see? Poirot raised a finger. Listen carefully, Hastings. Lady Margaret was the matriarch. Father Dominic, the shepherd. Symbols, yes? Then the next will be chosen not as a person, but as a role. A role tied to the village, to the church, to authority. Who is next, Hastings? The heir, the healer, the companion? That is the riddle. As he spoke, a sudden sound split the mist. A low, muffled clang. Hastings gripped Poirot's arm. The bell. It rang. Poirot's face darkened. Non, it is not the true voice of the bell. It is a trick, an echo. But it means only one thing. What? Poirot's mustaches bristled. That the killer has struck again. They rushed back to Arundel Manor. Inside, servants screamed. Clara Arundel was found collapsed in the gallery, unconscious but alive, her silver cross torn from her neck and lying upon the floor. Beside her was another note, pinned to the wall with a knife. When the bell is silent, the lamb shall be spared for now. Hastings nearly choked. Good Lord, Poirot, she was meant to die. Poirot bent low, examining Clara's face, her hands, the cross. His voice was grim. No, Hastings, not meant to die, meant to suffer. The killer wished her to know fear, to feel the breath of death upon her neck. It is cruelty, Hastings, pure cruelty, but it tells us much. The killer delays, hesitates. Perhaps they are uncertain. Inspector Morel burst in, his face pale. Monsieur Poirot, the village is in uproar. They demand answers. If we do not stop this, they may take justice into their own hands. Poirot stood, his silhouette framed by the lightning that flashed through the windows. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of iron. Then we must not delay, Inspector. Tomorrow, I shall reveal the truth of the bell. And when I do, the killer will know that Hercule Poirot is watching. Always. That night, alone in his room, Poirot sat with his little notebook. He wrote a single phrase again and again. The bell is silent because it hides a voice. And when at last he set down his pen, he whispered into the darkness. The answer lies in the tower. Beneath the silence, the truth waits. And I, Hercule Poirot, shall hear it. Chapter 4. The Voice of the Dead. The dawn that broke over Saint-Avellin was gray and heavy, as though the sky itself mourned. A fog rolled across the fields, swallowing cottages, hedgerows, and even the tall spire of Saint-Étienne church until it loomed like a phantom in the mist. Hercule Poirot stood at the manor's window, gazing toward that hidden spire. His reflection stared back at him in the glass. A small man, immaculate in dress, yet burdened by the weight of unsolved truth. Behind him, Hastings stirred uneasily. You didn't sleep, Poirot. You've been at that window all night. Non, mon ami, Poirot replied softly. Sleep is the luxury of those who are at peace. And he tapped his forehead, I hear the ticking of the little gray cells demanding an answer. You said yesterday you would reveal the truth of the bell. And so I shall. But first we must listen, Not with the ears, Hastings, but with the mind. The bell is silent, yet it speaks. The dead are gone, yet they whisper. If we do not hear them, it is only because we are deaf to what is plain. At breakfast, the household gathered in tense silence. Clara was pale, still shaken from her brush with death. Edward brooded darkly over his untouched plate. Dr. Felton's hands fumbled with his cutlery. Only Beatrice Langton sat straight, calm, her expression unreadable. Poirot sipped his coffee, then set the cup down with deliberate care. Mess Amos, I ask you all, why does the killer write these notes? Lady Margaret, Father Dominic, even Mademoiselle Clara, they're all reduced to symbols. The matriarch, the shepherd, the lamb. What? Edward's voice was harsh. Because they're mad, clearly. Some lunatic who thinks this is a game. Non, monsieur, Poirot said firmly. A madman does not write with such order. These notes are sermons. Someone plays the role of judge, pronouncing sentence upon this village. But why? What sin has Saint-Avellin committed? Beatrice's eyes glimmered. Perhaps you should ask not what the village has done, but what Lady Margaret uncovered. Poirot inclined his head. Just so, mademoiselle. She sought a secret, and for that she died. Later that morning, Poirot led Hastings and Inspector Morel once again to the church. The fog still clung about the stones, and the interior lay in shadow, the air damp and cold. Poirot moved with uncharacteristic urgency, climbing the narrow steps of the tower. His polished shoes echoed on the stone, each step measured deliberate. At the top, he stood before the bell. The great bronze mouth yawned silently, its surface faintly dusted with the strange powder Morel had discovered. Poirot touched it with a gloved finger, then examined the faint stain left behind. You see, Hastings? It is as I thought. The silence was not natural. This powder, it deadens the vibration. Clever, very clever. But the killer made an error. An error? Hastings asked breathlessly. If the bell is silenced, it cannot be heard at all. And yet, the villagers claim to hear it in the night. Do you not see? Someone wants them to believe the bell still tolls, though in truth it does not. Inspector Morel frowned. But how, Monsieur Poirot? We searched. No mechanism, no device. Poirot's eyes gleamed. No mechanism in the tower, non. But perhaps elsewhere. A smaller bell, hidden, rung at chosen times. Enough to trick the ear. A phantom bell, Hastings. An echo of fear. Descending the tower, Poirot paused abruptly near a disused storage alcove. He bent low, brushing aside cobwebs. There, concealed behind a rotting wooden panel, he found a small brass handbell. He lifted it delicately, his mustaches quivering. Voila! The voice of the dead. The killer created the illusion that the great bell still spoke. But this was the tone. Hastings gaped. But who would go to such trouble? Poirot replaced the handbell and turned slowly, his eyes thoughtful. Someone who wished to weave a legend, to turn fear into weapon. The silence of the great bell was not enough. They needed whispers in the dark to keep the village trembling. But why Hastings, why? Back at the manor, Poirot requested once more to see Lady Margaret's private desk. This time, he searched deeper beneath the false bottoms of drawers, behind the loose panels of wood. At last, he uncovered a bundle of old papers, yellowed with age. He spread them carefully upon the desk. There were letters, ledgers, even a diary, and in them, a name appeared again and again. The Brotherhood of Saint-Étienne. Poirot's breath caught. Now the mist clears. Inspector Morel leaned over. What is it, Monsieur Poirot? Poirot tapped the pages. An old society, formed in this village centuries ago. A group sworn to guard the church, to protect its secrets. But secrets, they fester, Inspector. Lady Margaret discovered something, perhaps in the tower, perhaps in these very papers, that threatened to expose the Brotherhood. And so she was silenced. Hastings stared. A secret society? Here? In this tiny place? Poirot's eyes glittered. Ah, Hastings, never underestimate the power of old loyalties. Have you not read The Secret of Chimneys? Even in grand houses, beneath the veneer of respectability, conspiracies thrive. Why not here? That night, Poirot gathered the household once more. The storm had passed, but the air remained heavy, tense with expectation. "My friends," he said gravely, "the deaths of Lady Margaret and Father Dominic are no random acts. They are sacrifices, intended to preserve a secret tie to the church and its silent bell." Lady Margaret uncovered it. Father Dominic, perhaps, was close to revealing it. And Clara was warned away. Edward slammed his fist upon the table. "Enough riddles, Poirot. Who killed my mother?" "Who?" Poirot raised a hand. "Patience, monsieur. The truth requires order. Each piece must fall into place. Tomorrow, I shall prove to you all what the bell conceals. And then, the mask shall fall." Beatrice's voice cut through the silence. "And if you fail, Monsieur Poirot?" Poirot looked at her steadily. "Then another shall die." That night, Poirot did not retire. He sat in the library, the fire casting long shadows upon the shelves. Hastings dozed fitfully in a chair nearby. Poirot, however, remained wide-eyed, his mind turning over every detail. At last, near midnight, he rose and returned to the church alone. The nave was dark, the air cold as stone. He moved slowly to the altar, his cane tapping softly against the flagstones. There, beneath the altar rail, he knelt once more. With a sharp tug, he pulled aside a panel of wood he had noted earlier. Beneath it lay a hollow space, and within that space, a leather-bound book. He lifted it gently, as though it were a relic. The cover was cracked with age, the pages brittle, and upon the first leaf, in faded ink, were the words, "The Brotherhood of Saint-Étienne, Oaths and Deeds." Poirot's lips pursed tightly. So, the bell was not the secret. It was the guardian, and those who silenced it to hide this. Behind him, a floorboard creaked. Poirot turned swiftly. A shadow moved in the darkness. "Who is there?" he called. No answer. Only silence, deeper than ever. Poirot's hand tightened upon the book. He knew, then, that the killer was close. Perhaps closer than he had ever guessed. At dawn, Poirot returned to the manor, weary but triumphant. He held the book aloft as he entered the drawing room, where the household had already gathered anxiously. "My friends," he said, his voice low but firm, "behold the voice that the bell was meant to silence. The truth lies here, in these pages, and it is a truth someone feared above all else." Clara gasped. Edward swore under his breath. Dr. Felton paled visibly. Beatrice merely folded her hands, her eyes glittering like dark jewels. Poirot laid the book upon the table. "Tomorrow, in the presence of all, I shall reveal its contents. And then, my friends, the game will end." And as he spoke, the great silence of the church bell seemed to press upon them once more, like the calm before a storm yet to break. Chapter 5. The Puzzle of the Silent Bell. The air in Saint-Avellin was heavy with anticipation. Villagers gathered in hushed clusters outside the church, their eyes darting nervously toward the silent tower. The bell had not tolled in weeks, yet the whispers of its phantom sound still haunted their dreams. Inside, in the cold nave of Saint-Étienne, Hercule Poirot had assembled all concerned. Clara, pale and trembling. Edward, restless with anger. Dr. Felton, withdrawn and uneasy. Beatrice Langton, serene, her face unreadable. Inspector Morel stood watch, notebook in hand, and Hastings, loyal and anxious, lingered by the pews. Poirot stood at the altar, the great leather-bound book upon it like an object of judgment. He placed his small hands gently upon the cover, as though it were sacred. "My friends," he began, his voice low, deliberate, yet charged with intensity, "the time has come to solve the puzzle of the silent bell." The words echoed faintly against the stone walls. All leaned forward, drawn into his gravity. "First, let us recall the facts," Poirot continued. "Lady Margaret Cavendish was found dead beneath the tower. Father Dominic followed, struck down in his rectory. Clara Cavendish nearly perished in her chamber, saved only by chance. And with each act of violence came a note, cryptic, symbolic, casting the victims in the roles of sermon and sacrifice. What was the connection? Not madness, not chance, but purpose." He touched the bell-shaped stain still visible on the pages of the Brotherhood's book. Centuries ago, a secret society was formed, the Brotherhood of Saint-Étienne. They swore to guard a treasure of the church. Not gold, not jewels, mais non, a truth too dangerous, they believed, to be revealed. The audience shifted uneasily. Clara whispered, "What truth?" Poirot raised a finger. "Patience, mademoiselle. Lady Margaret discovered their records, this very book. She realized the bell was not merely a bell, but a guardian. Its silence was engineered, so none might question why the tower concealed more than stone. And what lies behind that stone? Documents. Writings long hidden. Writings that, if made known, would expose the Brotherhood and shatter certain reputations in this village." Edward sneered. "You mean all this murder, terror, for some old papers?" Poirot's gaze sharpened. "For reputation, monsieur. For legacy. For the preservation of power. Do not underestimate the vanity of those who fear disgrace. Even in Murder on the Orient Express, the crime was born not of greed, but of justice twisted. Here, too, we see not greed, but fear." He turned sharply. "And so, the killer, who among us had the knowledge of the church, the access to the tower, the cleverness to use powder to silence the great bell, while planting a smaller one to maintain the illusion? Who had the skill to poison, to strike unseen, to deceive?" His eyes swept across them all. Edward shifted, Clara gasped, Felton trembled. But Poirot's gaze settled, calm and unerring, upon Beatrice Langton. "It was you, mademoiselle." The room froze. Beatrice did not flinch. She merely arched one delicate brow. "And why, Monsieur Poirot, should I wish to kill Lady Margaret? I was her companion, her friend. Her companion, yes, but more, her jailer. You watched her every move, fearing she would expose the Brotherhood. For you, Mademoiselle Langton, are its last living guardian." A gasp escaped Dr. Felton. The Brotherhood? Still alive, Poirot nodded. Not as once it was, but one remained, clinging to its oath. Lady Margaret's curiosity threatened everything. Father Dominic, too, began to suspect. "And so, you silenced them both." He held up the book. "The notes you wrote were sermons, were they not? In your mind, you were still priestess of this forgotten order, passing judgment upon those who trespassed." At last, Beatrice spoke, her voice low, steady. "And what if I were? Some truths destroy, Poirot. Lady Margaret thought herself strong enough to carry them. She was not, nor was Dominic. Better they fall, than the whole village rot in scandal." Poirot shook his head. "Non, mademoiselle. Better the truth shines, than murder hides it. For murder brings no salvation, only ruin." Inspector Morel stepped forward, voice stern. "Beatrice Langton, you are under arrest." She stood, her hands folded before her, regal in her calm. "So be it. Perhaps, Monsieur Poirot, you are right. But the bell will remain silent. And silence, in the end, is stronger than truth." Hours later, the villagers gathered once more outside the church. This time, under Poirot's direction, the silencing powder was cleaned away, the clapper restored. And at last, when the hour struck, the great bell tolled again. Its voice was deep, resonant, undeniable. a sound not of fear, but of renewal. Clara wept openly. Hastings clapped Poirot on the back, beaming. "You've done it again, old chap. I don't know how you see it all." Poirot merely smiled, his mustaches twitching. "It is not brilliance, mon ami. It is order. The world is full of chaos, but with the little gray cells, always there is order." He turned back toward the church, his eyes soft. "And perhaps now Lady Margaret rests easier. The bell that kept her silent shall speak once more." The puzzle of the silent bell was solved. Yet for Poirot, another case always loomed, another whisper, another mystery. For where shadows dwell, the truth waits patiently to be uncovered. And so, Hercule Poirot unravels another dark tapestry, where silence itself was the murderer's ally. But tell me, dear listener, what did you think of this mystery? Could you have guessed the truth before Poirot revealed it? If you enjoyed this journey through shadows and secrets, do not let it be your last. Subscribe now to our channel. Leave a like to keep the bell of mystery tolling, and share this story with fellow seekers of the strange and the unknown. For in every village, in every heart, there lies another puzzle, waiting only for Hercule Poirot